All right, so I've gone. Zoom decided to talk today.
Yes.
So I am Niki Aktipis. I am a high school life science teacher in Kansas City, Kansas public schools.
All right, and I'm Katie Lorik. I am a PE teacher for Wichita Public Schools.
Awesome. It's nice to meet you. And I think you were talking about a Flipgrid video, and I think that you're in also the 800 class.
Yes.
Okay. So very cool. So we will probably run into each other again this summer.
Probably.
So I think we decided on talking about the first two bullet points on here, dealing with racism in schools and dealing with sexual orientation in schools. I will, if you would like to start with where you're at with that, and yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll go ahead. We can talk about the sexual orientation thing. That was a huge thing for especially just in general for us in middle school this year. Trying to learn what's right, what's not right, trying to be accepting, like just following all of the rules that the district has, not stepping on toes. And especially hard for we had girls PE and boys PE, and they were two separate classes, and just trying to figure that out and making sure I was saying the right things. And some people are way more supportive of things like that than other people. And I'm just just tell me what to do and I'll do it. You know what I mean? But I think it was just one of the biggest struggles. And I think it's going to be a big struggle for the next couple of years, just trying to make sure we're doing things correctly and respecting others.
So I guess my question to you would be, has it always been boys and girls PE, or is this a new thing at your school? Mm-hmm. Or why is that the case?
So my first year, that's how it was. I was at Wilbur Middle School, and that's just how they do it there. I don't know. This next year, I'm actually doing co-ed PE at Truesdale Middle School. I got moved schools. So I don't know. I kind of think I'm kind of excited about the whole co-ed thing, because I think it helps relieve a lot of that, I guess, pressure. Does that make sense? I think the other reason why it was girls PE and boys PE were there are two gyms, and each gym had a locker room. Does that make sense? And so that's just kind of how it worked out with the setup of the school. I don't know. I didn't really ask about it. I just went with it. I was just happy to be, have a teaching position. And I think it's for changing out purposes, just my guess. But this year, the PE teacher doesn't even allow, or not the PE teacher, the principal doesn't even allow changing out. They do PE in their daily clothes, and that's just how it is. And it's helped with a lot of the issues there. So I don't have a good answer on that one.
No, I was just interested because I remember middle school was the literal worst for me doing PE, because I absolutely hated going into the locker room, and we had co-ed PE. So I was thinking it was kind of that situation going on. It was maybe there was only one changing room. Yeah, so I guess, see, now I want to ask you all the questions about this. So have you guys ran into the issue of trans folks in middle school? Trying to think of a better way to ask this. So has there been a situation yet where maybe there have been trans junior high schoolers, and you all had to kind of deal with what was happening there?
Oh yeah. So and I don't know, it was really interesting. I don't know what your views are on anything, so I'll keep it pretty neutral. I try to be really supportive. Anyways, so just very hard, because it's just, I've never really experienced it. And so it was literally 7th graders that were going through these, emotions and confusion. And they were all in one class. So it was just really weird. And I don't know if it was just weird coincidence or what. But there were several that, they, them, and, I tried my best. make sure I call them by the right name. But I was also confused because we had a big district meeting on like, if the parents did not approve, then we need to call them by their legal name. Very confusing. But then I felt like I was getting told one thing by another. So I finally just went to my assistant principal and my counselors, and we all sat down together. I'm like, please tell me, like, I want to be supportive and I want to make sure I'm doing things right, but I also don't want to be making parents mad. And so I think that was just the biggest struggle. There just wasn't a clear line on like, this is what you need to do, and this is, how you should handle that situation. So I just want more clarification to make sure I am doing it right and trying to handle those situations right. And sometimes it's just really frustrating too, because they didn't want to participate. So it was like a combination of just stuff, and I was just confused and didn't know how to handle it. And other PE teachers were just like, I don't know either. And so it's just been hard to figure out.
Well, middle schoolers are weird and gross and beautiful anyways, and they're confused, like they're just confusing regardless of the circumstances, I feel like. So on top of dealing with maybe questioning your own sexual orientation or gender identity, I can imagine maybe some disgruntled little, 6th and 7th graders running around loose. And I guess that's really interesting. Because I don't know too much about Wichita. Like, I'm relatively new to the Kansas City area. I've only been here a few years.
Okay.
So you were talking about the legality between if the parents' choice versus what the kid was identifying as.
Mm-hmm.
So how did that play out with your kids? Because I personally, I'm going to support my students. If that is a name they want to go by, or if they have different pronouns than what was assigned to them. And I can understand being a new teacher and not wanting to step on the toes of parents. But how did you interact with the kids and be like, hey, your parents want me to call you this. I understand that you want to be called something else. How did you deal with that conflict between parents versus your students?
Right. So honestly, I didn't have a whole lot of like communication with parents. It was more like remote, like we had to be careful about, we had to call them by their legal name on the computer because the parent didn't want to hear you using the name that they preferred. Does that make sense? So it got really complicated that way. In person, it was fine once I got like the clarification from the counselors that they said, yes, it's safe to call them that, because I don't want to cause any problems at home either. I just wanted to make everybody happy. And so, but like in person, once I got the clarification on, or they would even tell me like, please call me this. And I'm like, okay, I will check on that. But there was a time and point where the counselors were like, please call them by their legal name. That's what they need to go by here. They were aware of that. But then they'd come to me in class and be like, can you call me this? And I'm like, well, I'm not saying no, but let me go double check, I just think there's a lot of legalities behind it too. And so I just didn't want to get myself in trouble for doing the wrong thing.
No, I completely understand that. I'm old and grouchy, and I will also, just for clarity's sake, I am a queer person. I go by they, them. And we had a little bit of a ruckus at my school when I came out. So I will be a second year teacher this upcoming year. And I want to say I am the first teacher they've had that goes by gender neutral pronouns. And I've had some really good responses. Like, my team is very supportive of me. And I've not had any pushback from parents yet.
Mm-hmm.
But I've also not ran into many other queer individuals in our school that are students. So I guess the reason why I'm asking is because you've already been in this situation, and it's interesting to me to hear about the legalities and parents pushing back, because you would think they would want
what's best, like what the child wants, what makes them happy, kind of a thing. And that's, I think, the hard part. I think the biggest thing sometimes when it's more like the I don't know what the correct terms is. So, you
You're
know,
girl, I'm not, I will just,
okay,
I'm not
I don't
gonna
want
say
to
that.
offend, you know, I just don't want to offend anybody. And I know it's a very like hot topic right now, and I'm trying to be very supportive. So, you know, she to he or they, or, you know, I just think a lot of the parents are like, they're just not sure yet, you know. I don't want them to completely change their name, maybe give it a couple years, wait till they get to high school and make sure it's just not like a phase. Does that make sense? Because we all go through phases at some point in time. And I just think, and especially in like, I don't know, the Wichita area, we're not as open to those things. Does that make sense? And so I think that's what the biggest struggle is. And the parents are hoping that maybe it's just a phase. That's just my personal thoughts on what I think is going on at home. And so they're waiting to see if this sticks or if it's a phase.
Okay, that makes sense. And also, like, if you say something that you think is going to offend me, you're not going to offend me. I'm not one of those people, but I understand why some other folks are. So don't worry.
Okay.
If you feel like you've not got the right vocabulary. That's not, trust me, that's not gonna like, not here to do that to you.
Cool. Well, there are some people that are very not open. I've worked with several people that are not open. I'm like, I'm not saying I'm 100%, but I also want to support that student because I know what can happen if they don't have the support. And so it's like stuck in this middle, like trying to, I don't know the right word. I'm just trying to be supportive.
Yeah, no, and I 100% get that. And it's also, you know, getting your foot in the door into education, and then being like, well, I want to be supportive of my kids, but I also don't want to lose my job, kind of thing. So, you know, it takes a few years to get to being like, all right, y'all being ridiculous. I'm going to tell you what I got to tell you, because my mom was an educator for a very long time. And that was her advice to me, was like, listen, you're going to be worried the first few years, but after that, you're golden. And if you need to rock the boat, you rock the boat.
Mm-hmm.
So what if, and I'm trying to think, my brain has gone into problem solving. So what if the parents of those kids were presented with well documented research that shows that kids know pretty early on if they're going to be either trans or bisexual, gay, lesbian, whatever? Do you think those parents would be responsive to that research?
I don't think so. But I mean, I think there would be some major pushback, because I don't think they'd read into it. You know what I mean? They'd be like, oh, whatever. And maybe once they read through it, they might be a little bit more accepting, but I think there's going to be a lot of pushback. I just don't think in this area or in any rural part of Kansas that's going to be super accepting of that.
No, I mean, I get it. I grew up in a small town. I'm not there anymore for obvious reasons. But I'm still in the Midwest, so take that as you will.
Right.
So what other supports does your school, well, I guess you're moving to a new school, but what kind of supports is your school district working on for LGBTQ kids?
I know there's like, I don't remember what it was exactly called, like the ally group, they had meetings. There's that. Our counselors at least my previous middle school, extremely like supportive of making sure that they had somebody to talk to. And like, if we had, you know, some type of issue, like, hey, this student, I know they want to go by this, but they're also causing this issue. Like, what do I need to do? They're like, hey, just let us know. If you need us to talk to them about, you know, a situation, just let us know, you know, or if you need some advice on how to handle it, let us know. We can help you out. So honestly, my previous school was extremely like supportive of the LGBTQ community, which was great. You know what I mean? I think they need that. that support. I don't know what it's going to be like at my next school. So it's a much bigger school too. I went from like 800 students to I think we're at like 1200. So, and it's the biggest middle school in Wichita. So we'll see how it goes there and what the support's like for all those kids there. So,
well, and maybe you can be that person that brings something in and says, hey, like, we need this support for these kids. But if it's a bigger school, it sounds like there's probably already somebody there that if that's something you're interested in working with, because my school is going to be 2,000 kids this year at least, which I don't even want to think about. But it was interesting coming in because we only had a few people who were really interested in queer students and supporting them and queer teachers. And it's mind-boggling to me because Kansas City is a little bit bigger than Wichita, I believe. And I was like, oh, well, you are working on this, but also it seems like this should be moving faster since we're from a bigger city.
right.
But our counselors and everybody are really, really well involved. We had a couple of trans kids that I never got to meet because they moved districts before we came back to in person. But they were very adamant. They were like, these are his pronouns. This is his name. And I haven't a clue if parents were involved there, but it sounded like the student advocated for themselves and the counselors passed that information on, which I thought was really cool because when I was in high school, that would have never happened.
Right.
So it's just interesting to see that dynamic with Wichita versus Kansas City. It seems kind of on par though, because Kansas is still not very open. So, yeah, I like asking questions. So if you have questions for me, feel free.
I'm not a big question asker, so you can ask all the questions you want to ask and I'll give my answers. That's totally fine.
Well, now that we've talked a little bit about sexual orientation, and I think racism in schools also kind of ties into this because in my opinion, it's about cultural responsiveness, right? So it's our school districts are learning about the LGBTQ community, and I feel like that goes hand in hand with also learning about racial diversity in schools. So what does your school district look like in terms of anti-racist education and cultural responsiveness?
I mean, overall, like our district, I'd say is pretty diverse, and the district does I don't know if it's a good job. Back in the day, they set up a system to where they bring kids from like different areas, so they have different opportunities. Does that make sense? I don't remember what it's called, but they like bus them in, and so I would say the district does pretty well with it. I've never really seen any issues with racism. Yeah. So, but this topic just makes me think of this kid, I have to tell you, at recess, who was a white male, right? And he just would talk. And so then at recess, we'd put him over on the fence and be like, you need to be there. And he'd sit there and say, you're racist. But we're all I'm like, I don't understand. How are we? Anyways, that's all I could think of when this topic came up. And I'm just like, I don't get that.
His parents must be saying stuff at home. He's getting a really bad definition of racism at home, I feel like.
I think so, because I'm like, I don't know how we're racist. You're just the one talking and you're on the fence and now you're yelling this at us. So I don't know. Middle school kids are really funny.
They are just trying to figure out their place in the world because they're not quite kids, they're not quite teenagers. Middle schoolers are weird and beautiful. I appreciate you and I applaud you for working with them because high schoolers are a little bit more mellow because they've got that touch of apathy. They're like,
Mm-hmm.
eh. So you've got a lot more going on than what I do, because my kids are just like, yeah, I guess.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Yeah, my kids have been very opinionated this past year, you know.
which is excellent. They should be, because that means they are getting involved in the world and they're forming their own opinions, hopefully. Well, I guess on that note, I was going to ask, so since Kansas was kind of the lightning rod for desegregation of schools with Brown versus Board of Education, do you think that your school district and maybe other school districts in Kansas are a little bit more aware and responsive to anti-racism curriculum and diversity within our schools? Or do you think having that such big case in Kansas hasn't impacted anything, and Kansas has just gone about being like, it's all good, whatever, we'll do our best to desegregate schools? I know that was like a really weird way to say all that, but it's early morning, my brain is
Right.
still booting up.
Yeah, no, you're fine. I mean, I think so. And I think it's kind of hard to tell. I don't know. And like the PE setting, I don't really know. I'm like in my own world down there. And I do, you know, I treat everybody the same, no matter what, you know. And I don't do a whole lot of like teaching on those subjects. So I guess I don't really see it a whole lot. I've had a few students that have caused like issues and they say I'm racist, but they're not paying attention and they're swinging hula hoops around. And I'm like, no, you just need to pay attention. But I'm just like, I think it's good. I haven't seen any issues, but that could just be me and being like blind. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I just need to open up my eyes and pay more attention to those things.
Well, so you said this was your first year last year, correct?
Yes, but I did work as an office lady in a middle school for Wichita for 2.5 years.
Okay. Well,
So I'll be at my third middle school technically starting next year.
okay. So you would have dealt more with like parents and admin staff. So maybe you got a little bit of a glimpse of what was happening there. But I can understand in PE class, the topic's probably not going to come up a lot, except when a kid is wielding the word racist incorrectly.
Right.
So okay, and that, I mean, that makes sense that, you know, you still have a lot to. I mean, I also have a lot to learn at my school. Our school district in general, I believe a few years ago was sued for expelling or suspending Black males at a higher rate than literally everybody else. It wasn't that they were causing more problems. It was they were dealt out harsher punishments.
That's really interesting.
Well, yeah. So we got way before I came to district, which doesn't matter, but this is part of our history. So the last few years, we've tried to build a program of school intervention instead of jumping right to suspension for anybody. And I've seen it kind of in action since my assistant principal, I work really closely with her because her office is right down the hall from my room. She's really good at intervention. So she'll sit down with a kid who is just doing something stupid, and she'll talk to him and be like, all right, what steps can we take? And really involves the kids in restorative justice practices. And I'm not sure if that's just her style or if that's what was pressed upon her after this lawsuit. But but it seems really natural for her. And I know some of our other assistant principals, that's not how they run things. So I think my school district has taken a few steps forward with how we treat people of color and students in our district. But like, there's still some disconnect with some of the more veteran admin staff.
Mm-hmm.
That's the right way to put that. So I think we've got a couple more minutes. I'm watching the clock.
Oh, you're fine.
What is one thing that you think you can do to incorporate in your PE class? Let's say, because you're going to have instances of kids being like, hey, miss, you're being racist for yelling at me, which might not even be the case.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think you can incorporate into your classroom to kind of help kids understand what that word really means and how you all can work together to be anti-racist within a PE classroom?
That is a good question. I know, like, when I get frustrated and they start talking those things, sometimes I just have to take a deep breath and like walk away, because I know I'll just get frustrated and upset, and I know I'm not being that way, and then like I'll cry, and like, you know what I mean? Like, so sometimes I just, for myself, like, just take a deep breath, walk away, and I know it's all going to be okay. But maybe just making it clear from the beginning that everybody's going to get treated equally no matter what. Maybe even, I mean, I'll be working with 3 other male PE teachers this coming year, which is going to be a total change as well. A lot of changes for me, and I don't know if I'm quite ready for it. So I don't know what like their system is in their gyms, and there's 3 gyms. I don't know. There's a lot going on. And like, I guess figuring out what they do or how they handle that. And I think there's 2 white males and 1 African American male. So maybe even talking to, you know, all of them and seeing how they handle those situations and what they have in place would really help me figure out what I need to do to handle those situations. Which is crazy, because at my school, when I was an office lady, some of my best like parents that I had great relationships with were African American, and they're like, "Oh, hey, Miss Katie," and like, I loved them, never had issues. I was there to, you know, please the parents and make friends with the parents, and like, switching to like the student part is really difficult, because I feel like sometimes the students just aren't quite as open. I don't know. It's just a really different dynamic, and it's not what I was expecting when I became a teacher.
I think also just starting teaching in a pandemic year made making those relationships with students more difficult than they need it to be. So I think this year you'll be able to make those connections with the kids and listen to just what they've already experienced, because I know because I have mostly freshmen, and once I got to know them, they started telling me about stuff that happened to them in middle school, and I would ask them, be like, well, do you ever think that of me? Have I ever said anything to you that would make you uncomfortable that way? For example, I had kids that were just like, oh, so this middle school teacher said that I was a gangbanger because I wouldn't stop talking in class. And it was just multiple stories like that of this weird racial profiling of middle schoolers. So I think once they start to feel comfortable with you and telling you those stories, I feel like you can solicit feedback from them, be like, hey, well, have I ever said something like that to make you uncomfortable? Or
that's great. I like that.
Feel that way. And it's the same thing with when it comes to LGBTQ students as well. Be like, hey, have I ever said those things to you that make you feel uncomfortable? What would you prefer that I say? Or how can we make this right? Because at the end of the day, that relationship really matters with the students. And I mean, parent relationships also matter, but no,
it's a different aspect for me. I went from making great relationships with the parents and some of the bad kids, you know what I mean, to having just kids and like no parent interaction. I think has been a hard like transition. And the only time I hear from parents is when they're mad because I accidentally marked their student absent, like it's just a totally different world.
I also get those. And well, we also have family advocacies at our school. So like we have a homeroom where we have 15 students, 15 to 20 students, and we follow them throughout their high school years. So I hear more from those parents, but usually when I hear from parents like, well, why is my kid's grade so low? I don't know, maybe because they didn't turn in any homework.
Right.
Anyways, so I think that's about it for our conversation. Thank you so much for answering all my silly questions.
Yeah, of course, that went by really fast.
We were just like on top of it.
I know.
So I'm gonna hit the